Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Lean in Higher Education Conference. Thank you for attending today's session, which is the application of Lean and Design to improve student communications from the university, and it will run as a 45-minute session. My name is Fermina Bahadur Hale, and I'm one of the co-hosts or the moderators for this session. Before we start, I'd like to invite my esteemed colleague, May Goldberg, to do the acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Femina. So as hosts, the University of Melbourne acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work and learn. We pay respect to the elders, past and present, and the place of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation.
Thank you for the acknowledgement, May. So some quick housekeeping reminders before we start the session. Please stay on mute during the presentation. You're more than welcome to turn your cameras on so that we can see everyone. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Please note that the presentation is currently being recorded. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my fellow presenters for this session, who I'm fortunate to have as my respected colleagues. It's our honor today to welcome May Goldberg, Catherine Harris, and James Shai. Over to our presenters.
Thank you. Thanks, Femina. So as Femina mentioned, and designed together to improve student communications from the university. So before we kick off with that, we wanted to do some quick introductions. We worked on this as a project team, and we'll start with James. James, if you could introduce yourself.
Yep. So hello everyone, my name is James, and I suppose I actually have more of a background within chemical or process engineering. So I'm actually still a student at the University of Melbourne finishing my master's in chemical engineering, and that kind of enables me to give more of a student lens working on internal projects. Within the realm of service improvement and lean, I'm interested in that intersection between engineering methodologies and lean principles and their applications on improving the student experience.
Hi, I'm Catherine Harris. I'm a human-centered design researcher here at the University of Melbourne. I come from a market research background, so I'm really a qualitative researcher, and I really enjoy working on sort of design lean projects and getting to grow that lean toolkit.
And I'm May. So I'm a Six Sigma Black Belt, which I got working in logistics and manufacturing in the UK. I then moved into working in utilities and recently moved to Melbourne and started work at the university this year. So quite varied experience when it comes to lean. And what I'm really enjoying here is being able to actually combine lean and design thinking within projects working within the university. So that's a bit about us. Moving on to the project we worked on. So we'll give you a bit of context as to the challenge to this. So one was to actually support the team by using data to validate the volume of communications that students were receiving. The second element was based on the findings of the data analysis to develop a communications framework that would support the student experience while also improving the efficiency internally of university communications. So it was twofold in terms of the desired outcomes. One was external, related to student experience. One was more internal around efficiency. It's worth noting that there was a working group that had been set up with representation, cross-functional representation from across the university. And the sponsor really encouraged us to use that working group to both validate any assumptions we were making, but also to actually test and inform the design of what was being developed. So we had a really great support, as well as this working group to provide us with direction where needed. So that's a bit about the setup. And as we worked through with the sponsor and working group, what was actually required, we identified that there were a few success factors that we needed to address. The first one which I've already mentioned, was actually that quantitative validation of any existing hypotheses. So using numerical assessment to actually disprove or prove what people were thinking when it came to volumes. From that, we would be able to identify any focus areas that could define the scope. So were there specific student segments or parts of the student journey that we needed to focus our efforts on? We also recognize that actually, if this is a student, if one of the outcomes is improved student experience or related to student experience, we really needed to have a deep understanding of student needs, a deep qualitative understanding, not just quantitative. So that was something that we identified as being really important. And we need to develop some recommendations for delivering student communications, but also making sure there was the supporting governance around those. And finally, we recognized how important it was to actually have that working group and enabling that working group to take these recommendations forward. So based on what we thought there, we recognized that actually delivering this would require lean and design really working together in order to deliver this, because it had both of those elements. But really, we hadn't worked together in a project before, so it was sort of new to us in terms of how we approached it. So we'll pause there, and we'd like to ask you a question. So if, Femina, if you could launch the poll. Are lean and design collaborators or competitors? Or it depends. Okay, quite a lot of collaborators, which is nice to see. And we'll be interested as well if you could add in the chat your sort of your experience having worked with, if you've worked with lean and design together as well. So no competitors, which is interesting, and about 20% saying it depends. So thanks for that. I think we can end the poll and share the result. We can share the results and end the poll. Femina. Thank you. All right. So we'll talk you through a little bit about the process in terms of how we just sort of determined, how we would work together. So we designed this high-level process where lean informed design and both informed a solution. So we tried, and this would inform the eventual project plan and so on that was developed. But effectively, it starts, if you start from the top there, the audit findings themselves, we recognized would provide us with some sort of, just a numerical assessment of the volume of communications. So that was our starting point. Those in themselves would inform the design research, any focus areas, any specific research questions that needed to be asked. That was going to be based on what we were finding in the audit, any spikes or any troughs. The design research would inform the framework principles, the recommendations that were developed, but also the audit would be informed by the audit, as the design research was informed by the audit as well. So they sort of both work together. And the framework recommendations really needed to address the challenges that were initially identified by the audit and that were focused in on as well in the design research. So we saw it as an iterative process, one which informs another. So we broke this down into a number of steps, which you can see here, and this is how we structured it. So we started off with this quantitative audit of email communications, and that resulted in some analysis and reporting that we were able to collate. We recognized how important it is to actually validate this and to use the working group that we mentioned to help us do that. So we had a facilitated working session that we ran, in which we actually asked staff to validate those audit findings, to tell us about any spikes we were seeing, or to explain was there an event around this time, to help us, to give us some background as to that data. We then also did some desk discovery and synthesis work, looking at secondary research that had already been undertaken with students, And from that, we got some journey analysis. We were able to identify pain points by journey stage, and we were able to actually start developing, we've put those experience principles as the bottom bullet point there. That was one of the deliverables at the end. We also undertook primary research with students to validate the audit findings and also confirm some of that desk discovery work through a series of guerrilla interviews. And we used all of those insights in order to work with the working group through a co-design workshop to actually co-design this communications framework that we mentioned. And finally, all of that was validated with students at the end as well through primary research. So testing what we had developed, what we designed with the actual users of this, the receivers of these communications. So James and Catherine are going to talk about this in more detail in the next few slides, and you'll see this arrow appear on the top right-hand corner of each slide, designating which part of the process they're talking about. So over to James.
Awesome. So thanks for the introduction, May. As mentioned, the challenge for us was to address these initial hypotheses through a combination of quantitative validation, as well as qualitative understanding. So I'm going to be talking through how we approached the quantitative section that kind of formed a bit of a foundation for the work. In order to determine the initial success criteria and derive meaningful design insights, we needed this quantitative benchmark for the effectiveness of our comms. And this took place as a comprehensive email audit of as many communications as we could get over the past calendar year. So in total, we looked at over 4,000 emails across 13 different teams, including 2 faculties within the university, where the metrics associated with these comms included the dates of the emails sent, the open rates, as well as the click-through rates. In terms of our goals through this analysis, we needed to quantify the current state, enabling design to utilize our findings and draw meaningful conclusions. So to achieve this, our kind of approach was to identify any trends associated with different audience types and senders. For example, were certain faculties sending significantly different volumes of emails, and were there trends regarding the frequency of emails, as well as open and click-through rates throughout the semester, as well as within exam periods. Additionally, do certain teams within the university drive significant volumes of emails, and were there seasonal trends associated with each team? We also looked at specific email types, such as those related to recruitment, enrichment, and well-being, for example, to assess the effectiveness of different communication types. So if we move to the next slide, as to what this audit served to achieve, having this quantifiable and objective understanding of our emails and associated volumes, we're able to question some of the initial assumptions and validate others. We're able to segment our audience to determine which cohorts and audience splits tended to receive more emails. For example, we confirmed that first-year students do in fact receive more comms. Additionally, we discovered the current state of the comms landscape throughout the university, how different teams are sending emails, and the limitation of some current methodologies. For example, sending emails through Outlook lists doesn't yield quantifiable metrics such as open or click-through rates. I suppose the real value in this was about looking at the landscape as a whole when we overlaid the comms from all the different teams together, and looking at what this looked like from an individual student's perspective, as we hadn't had this view before. But just to reiterate, one of the more important flow-on effects from the audit was that it provided a platform for further design work to have validated findings to really enrich those design insights. So if we move on again, as we talk to the validations of these findings, it's really important to note that this analysis didn't occur in a silo, and it was in fact an iterative process where we consulted the working group consisting of subject matter and communications experts from various teams within the university. So throughout the process, we shared our findings with this team, and then asked questions such as whether these findings intuitively made sense to them, and if it aligned with our expectations. It enabled them to voice any concerns or questions they had, where they were able to provide direction and whether further interrogation of specific data sets or cohorts was necessary. Additionally, having this group from various functions of the university, it enabled them to identify any missing pieces to the puzzle where they were also able to provide key contacts for us to ensure that we were able to capture the whole picture. So this enabled the service improvement and design team to more wholly understand both the issues and opportunities as the working group saw them. Furthermore, it's really important to iterate that this group provided key endorsement for us to proceed with the project. So I'll now hand over to Catherine to talk about what the design approach looked like, starting off with some initial design research.
Thanks, James, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for everyone coming along this morning to be part of the audience, but hopefully be part of our conversation during the Q&A as well. Attending the first couple of sessions yesterday, I had a really strong sense of shared experience with the other practitioners that presented yesterday, and it kind of reinforced to me that many of you will be very familiar with the sort of challenge we had. So you also work at big, complex institutions. You often have a challenge that's really broad, and part of the role of design and lean is to kind of narrow that down and focus on an actionable, solvable problem. And our approach with the design part was we had the audit that gave us a view of a 6-month snapshot of the emails that had been sent. But we also had a massive pool of work that had been done before. We have teams that have approached this challenge from different angles at different times. We had multiple past research done by multiple teams. So with that huge amount of information that we had, we really needed to synthesize it and change it into knowledge so that it could be the foundation for the rest of the work. So having such a big research challenge, we wanted to not reinvent the wheel. We wanted to use the work we had before. So we took quite a systematic approach. We asked ourselves, what were the insights from this? Has this changed? What were the key findings? And so across multiple projects, we asked the same structured questions so that we could kind of compare how things had changed over time. It gave us a really clearly benchmarked and longitudinal view. It also meant that we didn't have to go back and recapture the pain points. Again, we just needed to validate the pain points that were there. So we saved time, which was an incredible bonus for this project. But we also, because we engaged with people, we avoided the trap that we sometimes face around here, and many of you probably face as well, of coming back with a solution where the teams you work with, where the expert teams say, well, we already know this. We've already worked on this before. We were actually able to say, yes, we know that you've worked on this and explored this before. We know how things have changed over time, and we have a really strong foundation for why we're going to solve in the way that we're going to solve. And that engagement, that bringing our working group on the journey was really important for us, because we didn't just want to do a nice looking report. We wanted to bring actionable change to the business, and we had clear metrics that we were looking to drive. So let's jump on to the next slide, please. So student validation. For me as a qualitative researcher, this is kind of the fun bit. So I had a massive pool of audit findings that James had prepared. I had a much more concise group of knowledge or insights or knowledge that we pulled out of the desk research, but we still didn't know how those resonated with students. We couldn't answer questions like, did that audit pick up everything? We knew what the volume was, but we didn't know how students felt about that volume. We had a raft of that knowledge that had been collected from 2015 through to 2020. We didn't know whether it was still relevant after the pandemic. And the complicating factor, because there always is a complicating factor, is that we were running really low on time. We had deadlines to meet, and we needed to do this quickly. So rather than have a really structured research plan, we went out with our clipboards into stop one. You can see the picture there, and did guerrilla interviews. I just stopped people that were waiting to speak to student counsellors, course advisors, just said, can I talk to you about your experiences with comms? And what was really valuable about that was it validated our audit findings. So we could actually hand on heart say, yes, we must have captured the majority of those findings because it relates to the student's experience. It helped us refine our problem as well, because we had a problem that had been defined by quant and by kind of historical data, but we were able to refine it with the student voice. And really importantly for us as a group, it gave us the confidence to move on and to start sharing these findings with our working group. So we'll move on to the next bit, which is called co-design. We call it co-design because I'm a designer, so co-design is part of my toolkit. But even if you're not a designer, I'm sure you're probably co-designing with your users and with the teams and your sponsors. Co-design is really about bringing the people that will use the solutions into the huddle with you to design them. So we knew that we had an expert working group. We knew that our working group contained the people that would need to follow through those recommendations. They were the people that needed to own those recommendations and provide case studies to others on why they should follow through with them. So we really wanted to design a solution not for them, but with them. So we developed some draft recommendations and a draft framework, and we took it into the working group and they put post-it notes all over it. We wanted them to know, does it make sense to you with your institutional lens? Can we say this? We wanted to know what other evidence they needed to actually believe in these. These need to be feasible. These need to be believable recommendations. People can't have a question about that. So what other evidence do we need to really convince you? We wanted them to tell us what was missing from the recommendations. Is there a blind spot? Is there something that research hasn't picked up? And we wanted to know how we can build on and refine these recommendations and make them better. So this co-design workshop that we had with our working group really allowed us to refine the recommendations. We made sure they were a good fit with their expectations of what the project would provide. It also had a really important role in building our relationship with the working group. We were being transparent with them, they were being transparent with us, and we were really encouraging them to take ownership of the final outputs. So we kind of reached a stage where we had confidence to move into the next phase, and the next phase was some student workshops. Now, we had the quant lens from the audit. By this point, we had this kind of institutional view from the co-design, and we had a big bucket of knowledge from the 2015 to 2020 research, but we needed to go out and speak to students. So we took a kind of classic qualitative approach, had a really structured sample of students. We made sure that we had representation of all the student groups that we wanted to be able to talk about and we wanted to be able to hit. And we went out and we spoke to them about things like, how do you actually feel about communications? What does too many emails look like? What does not enough emails look like? We kind of explored things like, how do you read your emails? Do you read them start to finish, or do you read them like a newspaper article and you read the headline, maybe the first paragraph, and you just gloss to the end? How do you actually read those communications? And we also did a very design kind of activity and asked students to tell us about the brands, the businesses that communicate best, what we can learn from them as an institution, and maybe where we don't need to keep up with, the Apples or the Googles of the world. So with that said, we can move on to the student workshops themselves. This is really just a slide about letting you have a little look under the hood to see what we did in those workshops and how we did it. So you can see that image on the left, that's kind of the picture icon and the memes. Coming from a qualitative background, I really like exploring the unsaid things with students, explore their assumptions through images. You can have a deck of cards which you use and ask students to pick one of those that represents how they feel about a subject. I've given them magazines when I'm live in the room with them. In this project, we asked them to do a Google image search and find an image that really summed up how they felt about our current communications, and another one that really summed up how they'd like to feel about our communications. I put memes in there because being our undergraduates and our coursework graduate students, there were a lot of memes. And they were actually a really great way of exploring, well, why did you pick that particular image? And they're a really great communication tool in going out to share these findings with our stakeholders. I also did just some more traditional testing. You can see the board to the right of that has various examples of comms and post-it notes all over it. And really this stage, again, helped us reframe again what the question or what the challenge was. Maybe volume didn't matter as much as we thought it did. It allowed us to validate that the recommendations and the frameworks and all the work we put in with our working group would actually improve the student experience. And you put additions and build-ons, and you can just see in the bottom right-hand corner there that you kind of got our board with our initial thoughts, and got post-it notes all over it for the quotes, etc. So that kind of brought us to a place where we kind of felt pretty confident. And with that, I'm going to get Femina to put the poll up again. I'm not sure that we'll have changed your minds. There were so many wonderful people who thought that design and lean were collaborators already. But I'd love people just to be thinking about and reflecting on their experience of bringing those methodologies together. So, wonderful. Going so well, 100%. And we'd love to hear more about this in the Q&A. So I'll hand back to May to close us out with the outcome.
Thanks, Catherine. And yeah, the poll results are still coming in, and there's a couple of it depends, and there is obviously an element of it does, I guess, depend on the type of project, but yeah, hopefully you'll have seen in our presentation that we were able to really work together to collaborate. I'll share the poll results to collaborate together on this to deliver hopefully a better outcome for our sponsor and working group. So on to the next slide. A little bit about the outcomes. So, we've talked to you, we wanted to illustrate the process that we went through primarily, because that was really, for us, the key learning point was how we work together, how we define the process by which one piece of work, so the lean or service improvement work, informs the design work. But we did deliver two main things to the working group. We delivered a draft student communications framework, which was part of that original, a big part of that original request that I spoke about at the beginning. And that was intended to provide a guide for staff on sending communications. Alongside that, we also identified the benefit of actually having some guidelines on content, and that really came from what matters to what's really important to students, was also having an element of that and addressing that. So both of those really were aimed at both making sure as a university, communication efficiency around communications was optimized, as well as making sure we could improve readership, improve things like measures like open rates, which are really important for comms, but also are targeting the student experience in the right way. So those were a couple of key outcomes. Another one really for us was the fact that we shared this piece of work across the university. We held a series of roadshows with the wider university community, and those were really well received, and both in terms of these outcomes, but also primarily listening to the process and listening to the outcomes of those student workshops. And that in itself has resulted in additional work for the team, which is also an indicator of customer satisfaction. So those are some of the key outcomes for us in terms of the project. And in terms of where we are now, we've brought you back to that cycle that you can see that we showed at the beginning. So we've done the work around the audit and the design research and those initial recommendations. We're now in the check and act stage of the PDCA cycle, and we're really validating, we're checking that what we've delivered is actually going to address what really matters to students, and acting on that feedback as well. So that's where it is now. It's in a continuous improvement cycle in itself, but with ongoing work with that working group and sponsor. And we really just wanted to end on this note in terms of some key outcomes for us and key learnings from us, that really bringing lean and design together enriched the insight that was delivered by both. So, working together actually provided us with much more benefit than it would have been working separately or as sort of two separate projects. You know, working hand in hand actually was really beneficial. And around that, it was really that quantitative methods enabled that qualitative design activity to be really focused on specific elements. And the design insights actually helped us interpret that quantitative data in a better way, in a more relevant way, and again, bringing it back to you know, the customers of this process, to the users. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. We'd like to pause there, and I'll hand over to Femina for any questions, and please add any questions to the chat as they come to you.
Thank you, May, for that. So we've got a few comments and questions. The first comment is from Eric, and the comment says, less communication, more readership, perhaps. Would you like to respond to that?
Oh, I can unmute myself and respond to that. So it actually, I think that was one of our hypotheses, to be quite frank. We thought that if we communicated a bit less, we'd lift the readership. And what we found out was it was a much more nuanced view. Readership depends on your relationship with the sender, content, where you are in your student life cycle. There was actually a lot of things that were influencing readership rather than just volume. So we actually kind of in some ways disproved our entering hypothesis.
Great, thanks for that. We've got a question that says, what were some of the guidelines you discovered for communicating with students?
Again, this probably sits with the design work as well. And in many ways, what we did was we validated what you would probably say is communications best practice across lots of sectors, in terms of whether it's, you know, the way in which your utilities communicate urgency to you, or it's the way in which brands remember what you're interested in. We really just validated a lot of those things, and that those cues, those commercial best practices would indeed work with our students as well. And at the moment, we're actually in the test and iterate. We're in that test phase where we're actually going out with communications, trying new stuff. What can we have learnt from the way in which your power bill cues urgency, and actually testing that. So we don't have any metrics yet to really say that we've proved these things up, but we have some strong ideas from the design research. So maybe if we present at this conference next year, we'll be able to give you a better view.
Great, and we've got a question from Peter. Have you thought to use this approach towards staff communications? Anyone can answer?
Good idea. I'd love to do that, May. Let's do it.
I mean, it's a good question, because, you know, as we were working through this and testing some of these things with students, you know, people said to us, oh yeah, that's what I do with my the university emails I receive from, you know, as a staff member. So yeah, definitely some parallels that it's a good idea to consider implementing. So yeah, thanks for that.
And Eric has questioned whether it would be better to send the communications from a person or a department.
It actually depends on the communication. We found that students aren't reading. We had that question about readership. Students don't read right to, like, it's not like a novel where you read every single word. Students are looking through much more like a newspaper article where you're looking for the key information, for example. So it's quite a nuanced picture. It depends what the information is, whether it's better from a team, a person, a department, or from the university. It actually depends on the content very much. But it's a great question.
Sure.
A question for you from Rebecca as well, yes. Femina.
Yep, I was just about to read that one. So Rebecca is commenting on how long did the whole process take from the initial request about the project to the final deliverable, and did you experience roadblocks at any particular part of the project?
So I'll answer that one. So the project started about March and went through to, I think, June or July. So that phase of the project. In terms of, and I think it's worth noting that, we have provided this deliverable, however, it's still being tested and worked through. In terms of roadblocks, there's always roadblocks, particularly around, we had some around collating some of the data. The complexity with the university communications is that they come from everywhere, including faculties. So it was trying to get that holistic view of everything and emails that are sent through systems. So there were some challenges around being able to provide that really good view. So that was one, but that's where, again, we really used the working group to help us identify any gaps and help us source some of those. So that was one, but I think, otherwise, Catherine, did any roadblocks from your side that you want to mention, or?
I'm sure everyone in the room who works with students knows getting them into focus group rooms, workshop rooms, Zoom rooms, whatever, seems to be much more difficult post-COVID. In a strange way, I used to be able to put up a message when they were all on campus, or almost kind of have the sign up on the room that we're going to be in this room today doing this work. And I didn't have a lot of problem getting people into a room. It feels as though definitely post-COVID something has changed. We tried to do the workshops first time round because students were back on campus. I tried to do it in person. All the communications I sent said this is an in-person opportunity, and they still registered for the session and then asked me for the Zoom link. Like, yeah, I've decided I'm not, like, I'll just Zoom in for that. And I see Shreya there smiling, yes, because Shreya was in these sessions with me quite often as a support. And yeah, we had a lot more kind of reticence probably about being in the room. We had more problems recruiting students, and it certainly in terms of timing did create a bit of a roadblock. It kind of put an extra couple of weeks in our timelines because it was much more difficult to recruit them. And they seem to have become schooled that everything you might do at a university is delivered through multiple channels. So even though we said this is in person, they said, well, there's a Zoom link. And then I also had people when we did Zoom that said, oh, which room are you going to be based in for Zooming out as well? Oh, my internet wasn't great at home, so I'll just come in for it. And some of those things, those expectations have changed. So I'm certainly getting used to the new world.
Thanks for that, Catherine. We've got another question from Mohammed. Have you conducted a survey to measure the impact of this exercise? And what was the best tool you used to measure achieving the objectives?
I might speak to the survey bit and then I'll flip to you for the metrics, May. We made quite a conscious decision with this work that we wanted the metrics to be around things we could measure, like behavioural metrics out of readership, rather than students giving us a recalled view about how things had changed. Student satisfaction metrics seem to go up and down and correlate with lots of things which are not related to what you're asking about, usually in the question if you do a survey. So we're much more interested in lifting things like open rates or click-throughs, but better than me.
Yeah, I think that sort of answers it. And we are working through with the working group any additional metrics indirect that we might also be able to use, as well as the findings out of these workshops that are ongoing. So a few different methods, but not a survey directly. But yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question.
Great. And Nolan has asked if UOM utilizes a CRM or what tools are used to deliver communications.
Yes, and so that did help because having that data, in the CRM was easier to obtain. But outside of that, there are individual emails that are sent outside of that system, and so that was where we had more of a, that was where we had additional challenges, is just trying to get those additional communications that are sent outside of that, and making sure we covered all of those. So, so yes, we do. Yeah.
And our last question from Ryan, did you use A or B testing in your analysis?
We did a bit of testing, like A/B testing in the group. So we showed them a kind of the way a message was shared maybe in semester 1 and the way we were going to share it in semester 2. We did a little bit of that, but actual A/B testing for click-through, we haven't gone through that process. We've had kind of conversations around it, but I think it was a little bit of a challenge to get A/B testing in, just because for a message to be important enough that we would A/B test it, we don't want to use it as a test case, if that makes sense. So we're still looking at the best communication for us to do A/B testing with.
Great. So I think that's the end of all of the questions that we've got, unless we've got any other additional questions. But yeah, it looks like that's the end of all of the questions on the chat. So I think that would be the end of the session. So I would like to just thank all of our presenters today, May, Catherine, and James, for presenting. Thank you to everyone who has attended this session today. And this brings us to the end of